I'm going to start with a little bit about myself. Um, I think you know, and most of you are from Ottawa, and I think you know that the Tisarna is presently in its annual winter retreat. So there's a lot of quiet going on. Even the builders, they seem to be, well, they're not making as much noise. So the Dhamma hall continues to be worked on, but not too noisily usually. And if they make noise, it also is sort of music to our ears anyway. So, and Lumpur Viradhammo just returned from Asia just a couple of days ago now, and that was very nice. He's still getting his feet under him, as it were, but he's doing quite well. And I think you know that he damaged, or he had a fall there and damaged, and had to have an operation to reattach the rotor cuff. So, and that's going well. He has a good physiotherapist here in Perth, and received good treatment while he was in Asia. So he's really very chipper and doing well. And I think the shoulder itself is progressing nicely. He's still taking good care of it, as he should, but it's doing well. And I'm off to Asia in 2 days. So there's kind of a lot. I'm making little lists for myself these days. So Lumpur was away for a couple of months, and so and the task of being the senior monk fell to me, and that's been very easy, really. And with the retreat beginning, one of the things that we did last year as well is that I've been reading from Stillness Flowing, the monumental biography by Ajahn Jayasaro of Ajahn Chah. Very beautifully written, very fulsome in its treatment of not just Lumpur Chah himself, but giving the full context, the Thai forest tradition, the various monastic traditions in Thailand, the history of Buddhism in Thai. I mean, it's a very full treatment right up to the kind of particularities of Buddhist life and practice and attitude and so forth in Isan and the life of a Tudong monk and so on and so forth. So it's a really beautiful book. And I'll just mention something now, which is that if you haven't seen it, those of you who don't have it, and we do have copies for just free distribution here at Tisarna. So when things kind of open up again in April, by all means, avail yourself to a copy. They're also available for free download on forestsangha.org. And that's a very easy way to receive one as well. So I'm doing something a little different. I did the same thing the other night, actually. I don't think I've ever done this before, but I'm going to carry on my morning practice, which is to do a little reading from this biography and then offer some reflections. But it's like story time. Just consider it story time. You know, the things that you did for your kids, and you might remember from your own childhood. This is story time. So, and there are dozens of incidents in the book, and there are many dozens of passages of fine Dhamma and so on. I mean, it just happens that we read this just a few days ago, and I thought it would be of interest to people who aren't so familiar with this kind of story. And as always, Ajahn Jayasaro provides a good context, but actually the bulk of what I'll read tonight is taken directly from a talk that Lumpur would have given at some point, dealing with the particular event that he relates here. So this is called In the Cremation Forest. For thousands of years, the Thais have perceived themselves living in a universe inhabited by unseen forces, malevolent and benign. It is unusual to discover a blind belief in the non-existence of ghosts, even amongst the most materialist of modern urban dwellers. Fascination with ghost stories is almost universal. Although secular values have spread the deep belief in spirits, many different kinds of ghosts are spoken of in Thailand. The three kinds that can possess people are particularly feared: Pitai Hong, victims of a violent death; Pitai Tong Klom, women who died in childbirth; and Pipop, who, greedy for raw meat and offal, enter people's bodies and chew away voraciously at their intestines. Pipret, or the Pali of that is Pitta, meanwhile, are the hungry ghosts met with in the Buddhist texts. They are horrifyingly ugly, gaunt and emaciated, with just disheveled hair, long necks, sunken cheeks, deep-set eyes. They feed on pus and blood and have huge bellies, as well as tiny mouths, no bigger than the eye of a needle. Their appetite is never satisfied. They dwell in cremation forests and desolate areas and emit long, shrill, and plaintive cries as they approach human beings. In the time and place in which Lumpur grew up, Isan of the 1920s and 30s, fear of ghosts was normal and rational. They were all around. While the modern Western mind is not so terrified of ghosts, it has its own profound fears. In George Orwell's novel 1984, prisoners under interrogation are confronted with the deepest and most visceral of these in the dreaded Room 101. The following passage might be best appreciated if it is considered that the cremation forest was Lumpur's Room 101, and that he entered it of his own accord. So this takes up now with Lumpur's own narration. It was late afternoon, and I was really afraid. I didn't want to go. I was paralyzed. I told myself to go, but I couldn't. I invited postulant Gao to accompany me. He would have been an anagarika. Go and die there, I told myself. If it's time to die, go and get it over with and done with. If it's all such a burden, if you're so stupid, just die. That's the kind of thing I was saying to myself, even though at the same time I still really didn't want to go. But I forced myself. If you're going to wait until you're completely ready, you'll never go, I reasoned, and you won't ever tame your mind. In the end, I had to drag myself there. As I got to the edge of the forest, I faltered. I'd never stayed in a cremation forest before in my life. Postulant Gao was going to stick close, but I wouldn't have it. I sent him off a good distance away. Actually, I wanted him to stay really close, but I was worried that I'd become dependent on him. I thought that if I had a friend close by, then I wouldn't be afraid, and so I resisted the temptation and sent him away. If I'm so frightened, then tonight let me die. Let's see what happens. I was afraid, but I did it. It's not that I wasn't afraid, but I dared. But the worst, I told myself, all that can happen is that you'll die. Well, as the dusk started to thicken a little, just my luck, they carried a corpse swaying from side to side into the cremation forest. Why should this happen on this very day? As I practiced walking meditation, pacing backwards and forwards, I could hardly feel my feet touch the ground. Get out of here, my mind screamed. The villagers invited me to go and chant the funeral verses. I wouldn't have anything to do with it. Get out of here, I was still thinking. But after I'd gone a short distance, I returned. They came and buried the corpse right by my glot, and then made a sitting platform for me from the bamboo they'd used to carry the body. They don't burn corpses that died unnaturally, like as in murder or suicide. What should I do now? The village was 2 or 3 kilometers away. This is it for sure. What shall I do? Just get ready to die. Postulant Gao moved closer. I sent him away and told myself, just go ahead and die. Why are you so terrified? Now we're going to have some fun with this. If you don't dare to do it, you won't know what it's like. Oh, it was such an intense feeling. It hardly seemed as if my feet were touching the ground. And it was getting darker and darker. Where are you going to go now? Go right into the middle of the cremation forest. Die. You're born and then you die. Isn't that the way it goes? I battled with myself like that. After the sun had gone down, I felt I should go into my glot. That's the little sort of an umbrella that becomes a kind of tent with a mosquito net around it. My legs were refusing to move. My feelings urged me into the grot. I'd been practicing walking meditation in front of it, opposite the grave. As I walked towards the grot, it wasn't so bad, but as soon as I turned towards the grave, I don't know what it was. It was as if there was something pulling at my back. Cold shivers went down my spine. That's what the training is all about. You feel so frightened, your legs refuse to walk, and so you stop. Then when the fear is gone, you start again. So as it got dark, I entered my grot, and a wave of relief swept over me. I felt as happy and secure as if the mosquito net were a 7-tiered wall. My alms bowl seemed like an old friend. That's what can happen when you're on your own. You can see even a bowl as your friend. I had no one to rely on, and so I felt happy and took comfort in its presence. It's on occasions like this that you really see your mind. I sat in my grot and watched for malevolent spirits right throughout the night. I never slept a wink. I was afraid, but daring to train myself, daring to do it. I sat staring into the darkness the whole night. I wasn't sleepy once. Drowsiness was afraid to show its face as well. I just sat there like that the whole night. In practice, if you're that scared and you just follow your mind, you'd never do it. It's the same with everything. If you don't do it, if you don't practice, you don't get any benefit. I practiced. As the dawn broke, I was overjoyed. I was still alive. I felt so happy. From now on, I just wanted there to be only the day. In my heart, I wanted to kill the night forever. I felt good. I hadn't died after all. Even the dogs were out to test me. I went on alms round alone, and some dogs chased around behind me and tried to bite my legs. I didn't chase them away, just let them bite. It seemed that something was out to get me. They kept snapping away at my ankles. Some bites got home, some didn't. I felt shooting pains, and every now and again it seemed as if a wound had been opened up. The village women didn't try to get a hold of their dogs. They thought the spirits had followed me into the village, and that's why the dogs were barking. They were chasing after spirits and biting them, not me. So they just left them at it. I didn't drive the dogs off. I just let them bite me. Last night I was almost frightened to death, and now I'm being attacked by dogs. Let them bite me if I've ever hurt them in past lives. But they just snapped away ineffectually, and that's what's called training yourself. After alms round, I ate my meal and started to feel better. The sun came out and I felt warm and at ease. During the day, I had a rest, and by then my mind was getting back to normal. I thought everything was all right. It was only fear. Tonight, I should be able to get down to some meditation practice. I've been through the fear. Tonight should be fine. Late afternoon, here we go again. They carried in another corpse, an adult. It was even worse than the previous night. They were going to cremate it right in front of my grot. This was much worse. At least the villagers burned the body, but when they invited me to go and contemplate the corpse, I stayed where I was. Only when all the villagers had left did I go. They've all gone home and left me alone with the corpse. What shall I do? I don't know what similes I could use to describe to you this fear, and in the nighttime too. The fire had burned down. The embers were red, green, blue. They sputtered and every now and again broke into flame. I couldn't bring myself to practice walking meditation in front of the fire. As soon as it was completely dark, I got into my grot, as I'd done the night before. I sat in that thick forest with the smell of the corpse burning smoke in my nostrils the whole night. It was worse than the night before. I sat with my back to the fire with no idea of sleeping. How could I sleep? I didn't have the slightest desire to. I was nervous and wide awake the entire night. I was afraid and I didn't know who I could depend on. You're here by yourself and you'll have to rely on yourself. There's nowhere to go. It's pitch black out there. Just sit and die. Where do you want to go anywhere? If you were just to follow what your mind told you, you'd never go to a place like that. Who would willingly put themselves through such torment? Only someone with a firm conviction in the Buddhist teachings and the fruits of practice. It was about 10 o'clock and I was sitting with my back to the fire. Suddenly I heard a sound from behind me. Dong tang, dong tang. I thought that maybe the corpse had rolled off the fire and perhaps some jackals had come to fight over it or something. But no, that wasn't that. It wasn't it. I sat listening. Then came the sound, kroot krat, like someone moving ponderously through the forest. I tried to dismiss it from my mind. Shortly afterwards, it began to walk towards me. I could hear the sound of someone approaching me from behind. The footfalls were heavy, almost like a water buffalo's. But it wasn't a water buffalo. Fallen leaves thickly covered the forest floor. It was February, and I heard the sound of someone treading on the big brittle leaves. Clop, clop. There was a termite mound at the side of my blot. I heard the steps skirting as they approached. I thought, whatever it's going to do, let it do it, because you're ready to die. Where do you think you're going to run anyway? But in the end, it didn't come towards me. The sounds thudded off ahead in the direction of the postulant. After it moved away, there was silence. I don't know what it was. All I was aware of was the fear, and that made me imagine all kinds of things. It must have been about a half an hour later that I heard the sound of someone walking back from the direction of postulant Gao. It was exactly like the sound of a human being. It came straight towards the glot as if it was determined to trample over whoever was inside. I just sat there with my eyes closed. I wasn't going to open them for anything. If I was going to die, then let me die right here. When it reached me, it stopped and stood silent and motionless in front of the glot. I felt as if burned hands were clutching in the air in front of me. I was sure the end had come. My whole body was petrified with terror. I forgot Buddho, Dhammo, Sangho, everything. All that existed was the fear. I was as stretched and tight as a monastery drum. All right, you're there, but I'm staying here. My mind was numb. I didn't know if I was sitting on a seat or floating in the air. I tried to concentrate on the sense of knowing. It's probably like tipping water into a jar. If you just keep adding more and more, then eventually it overflows. I was so frightened, and the fear kept increasing until finally it overflowed. There was a release. I asked myself, what are you afraid of? Why are you so terrified? I didn't actually say that. The question arose spontaneously in my mind, and the answer arose in response. I'm afraid of death. That's what it said. So I asked further, where is death? Why are you so much more afraid than an ordinary householder? I kept asking where death was until finally I got the answer. Death lies within us. If that's the case, then where can you run to escape from it? If you run away, it will run with you. If you sit down, it will sit with you. If you get up and walk off, it will walk off with you because death lies within us. Nowhere to go. Whether you're afraid or not makes no difference, and still you have to die. There's no escape. These reflections cut off my thoughts. When this dialogue had come to an end, familiar perceptions returned to the surface of my mind and the fear subsided. The change was as simple and total as when you flipped your hand over from its back to its palm. I felt a great amazement that such fearlessness could arise right at the very same place that there had been such a strong fear just a few moments before. My heart soared to the heavens. With the overcoming of my fear, it started to pour with rain. Maybe it was rain, the rain that falls on lotus leaves in the legend, the one that only makes you wet if you let it. I don't know. There was a sound of thunder and a wind and rain, deafeningly loud. It rained so heavenly, all of my fears of death were forgotten. Trees crashed down and I was impervious. My robes, every piece of cloth I had was soaked. I just sat there quite still. Then after a while, I started to weep. It just happened by itself. Tears started to roll down my face. Before that, I'd been thinking how like an orphan I was, sitting there shivering in the middle of the pouring rain. I thought that probably none of the people happily asleep in their houses would imagine that there was a monk sitting out there in the rain all night. They were probably snuggling up in their warm blankets. And here I am sitting here, soaked to the rain, soaked to the skin. What's it all about? As I started dwelling on those thoughts, a sense of the sorrowfulness of my life arose and I began to cry. The tears were streaming down. That's all right. It's bad stuff. Let it all run out until there's none left. That's what practice is. I don't know how to explain what happened after that. Following my victory, I just sat there and all those things took place in my mind. It would be impossible to describe them all. I came to know and see so many things, too many to relate. It reminded me of the Buddha's words, Pachatan Veditabo Vinyuhi, to be seen by each wise person by themselves. That was really true. I was suffering out in the middle of the rain, and who could know how I felt? Nobody, only me. I was so deeply afraid, and then the fear disappeared. The people in their warm, dry houses couldn't know what it was like. Only I could know it because it's Pachatan. Who could I tell? Who could I relate it to? The more I reflected on it, the more certain I became, and the more my heart was filled with energy and faith in the teachings. I contemplated the Dhamma until dawn. As it became light, I opened my eyes, and whichever way I looked, the whole world was yellow. The danger had gone. At night, I had felt the need to during the night, I'd felt the need to urinate, but I had been too afraid to get up. I'd held it back, and after some time, the urge passed. In the morning, when I got up, the whole world looked as yellow as the early morning sunlight. I went to urinate, and all that came out was blood. I wondered whether something inside me had torn or broken. I became afraid that something might have ruptured, and then I was confronted by an immediate retort. If it's ruptured, then it's nobody's fault. It's just the way things are. It was an immediate and spontaneous answer to the worry. If it's ruptured, it's ruptured. If you're going to die, you're going to die. You've been sitting here minding your own business. If it wants to rupture, let it. The mind carried on this dialogue. It was like two people struggling for possession of something, one pulling on one way and the other pulling it back again. One part of my mind elbowed its way in saying there was a serious problem. Another part fought with it immediately. As I urinated, the blood came out in gobs. I started to wonder where I could find some medicine. Don't bother. Where would you go anyway? You're a monk. You can't dig up medicinal roots. If it's time to die, then just die. What are you going to do about it? Dying while practicing the teachings is noble. You should be satisfied to die. If you're going to die for the sake of something evil, that wouldn't be worth it. But if you die like this, it's fitting. All right, I said to myself, so be it. So Ajahn Jayasaro takes up the narrative again, just to finish things off. That morning, Lumpur went on alms round, shaking with a fever that he bore patiently for a week before deciding to ask permission to convalesce at a nearby monastery. 10 days later, he had recovered sufficiently to continue his wandering. Evan. So, when was the last time you were read to? Yeah. At this point in Lumpur Cha's life, he had not too many weeks before, he had finally encountered Lumpur Man, by all accounts, the most famous, but also the greatest teacher, the kind of regenerator of the forest tradition in Thailand in the 20th century, just a monumental figure in that tradition. An arahant by all accounts, powerful teacher, and very, very psychic and so forth, and just a remarkable person. Lumpur Cha spent a total of 2 nights in his company, heard 2 Dhamma talks, and received personal teachings on 2 occasions to questions that he had. So his experience with Lumpur Man was by normal standards very brief, and yet he considered to the end of his life Lumpur Man to be his teacher. And he received a few significant indications of this even later in this narrative. And the doubts that Lumpur Cha related to Lumpur Man when asked, Lumpur Man responded to with great penetrating wisdom, and they basically clarified Luang Por Chah's doubts, and in his mind just sort of opened up the path that remained to him, which he followed with a kind of ardor and intensity and bravery that we see in that recent passage. And I think most of us probably, on this call had read, maybe many of you, at least some of you, I'm sure, read this biography, or you've maybe encountered that story in shorter, smaller texts that have collected some of Ajahn Chah's teachings and that kind of thing. So the story might be even rather familiar to you. And then, the obvious question is, well, why did I select that? Well, I've told you, it just happened. I read it recently. But it's inspiring, and probably many of us here have read books by or about Luang Por Chah, or about Mechi Kao, or Wangta Mahabua, or any of the great forest figures that inspire our tradition. And there are, of course, other great monks and nuns and other traditions that you may be quite familiar with. And here you are, your householders, and you have your car payments, and you take calls from your kids, and mediate between domestic disputes or the concerns of grandchildren, or worries about mortgages or bosses or things. I mean, in other words, you live in straightforward terms very different lives from anything that is recounted in a story like that. So how can it be relevant, you might say? Well, maybe it's just the kind of armchair tourist, or armchair spiritual practitioner in us, we might say. But I think that there's much deeper. There are much deeper things going on in such a thing, and which stimulate the kind of interest, appreciation, and inspiration that brings people back to biographies of this kind, and into the translations of various teachings of Luang Por Chah and other great teachers. It's a little bit like, and I used this image the other night as well. I mean, it's a little bit like why we enjoy watching sports on television, isn't it? Or YouTube, or wherever we watch sports these days. I mean, probably everybody here, and some of you are quite elderly, I know, and some of you are, I imagine pretty young, 30s maybe. I don't know if there are any 20-year-olds, but but everybody, I'm sure, has ridden a bicycle and played a bit of soccer, and maybe done some strenuous hiking, or sailed, or you've partaken of some sporting activity in your youth, or maybe you still do. Enjoy it all get out. Played a bit of tennis and that sort of thing. I played soccer when I was a kid, and played tennis, and I was, I liked track and field and that sort of thing. Ran, sprinted, and jumped, and all kinds of things that kids do. And but I was never that good at it. I was good. I was good for my school. Maybe maybe we won some prizes in our local fairs or something like that. But there weren't television crews, most likely, in your junior high or your high school, or what have you. But something draws us to watching these things, these events, the Olympics, on television, to see athletes who have dedicated themselves to unbelievable degrees to perfecting some move in gymnastics, or some running a marathon, or whatever it is, kicking a soccer ball. all of these things can seem rather like aimless pursuits, really, kicking a ball around a field, hitting a ball with a club into a little cup. I mean, comedians make great sport of kind of mocking the seriousness with which we take these things. And yet, there is something in most humans that is kindled, is aroused when we witness greatness in some even minor pursuit, playing chess, playing bridge, whatever it is. There's something which is aroused in us as we see another human being who has, for all intents and purposes, perfected some pursuit. For that matter, watching a really skilled woodworker. I mean, there we go. That's something I'm interested in. A drywaller, some sort of craft, even watching someone who really, really knows what they're doing. That's quite interesting. And to do anything really, really well, it takes discipline. It takes commitment. And intelligence and all kinds of things come into it. So I think this is partly what inspires us to come back again and again to a biography of this kind, and to reflect on the stories that come out of such a text. So Lumpur Cha was a kind of Olympian, a spiritual Olympian, you might say, and he. By all accounts, certainly by the faithful followers in our tradition, I'm not going to continue that metaphor any further. It begins to really demean it, but he certainly came to the end of his doubts, and he accomplished what the Buddha did claim on so many occasions could be accomplished by someone who is ardent and sincere and intelligent, and who applied themselves continuously, day and night, as if the night were the day and the day were the night, basically. So we get that in spades in that narrative. So what does it teach us? Well, it reminds us, doesn't it? It reminds us of where our own aspirations lie. Humility is bound to set in soon into a narrative or near the end, or at some point we realize, wow, I couldn't do that right now. And it is a bit of it's almost inevitable, I think, especially in young practitioners, young aspirants. And I think in particular here of people coming into the robes, for instance, in a training monastery. And these are the kinds of things that really set us on fire. And we want to practice in that kind of way, and long hours and into the night and on and on. And usually, to some degree, those efforts become tempered with some kind of moderation, because it's very rare, actually, that a person has the kind of, and I'm speaking about, again, people who have the wherewithal to find themselves in a monastery and actually be willing to give up the regular things in a social life and a familial life to pursue this kind of thing. But even there, it's very rare for someone to be able to pursue it at that kind of level. But what happens where some humility and some moderation comes in is people find a level, and then they push that a bit, and then step back, and they push it from, there's a kind of rhythm to practice. 1 week, 1 month, 1 year will vary from 1 week, another month or year, because our energies vary, the time of the year, the season, the nutrition that we're gaining. All of these things will change the degree to which we can apply ourselves with that kind of ardor. And similarly, the respective effort that individual practitioners, even very sincere, who, as I said, who have entered monastic life, the degree that they can pursue this will vary too, and their interest in their how they resonate with this sort of practice over that kind of practice. Some people become very fond of walking meditation, not so fond of sitting meditation, and what kind of sitting practice. Some people are drawn to breath, some people to metta, some people to the nimittas, and I mean there are so many forms of practice, as you probably know. So things change, and we become better and better acquainted with our own character, become wiser about our own capabilities, and also where it's really quite appropriate to continue to push, to put forth some noble struggle in the pursuit of greater clarity and some wisdom and some ease in life that can only come through seeing things as they are. And even when those great momentous kind of archetypal insights that we read about may not come through in their full fruition, full clarity, still, if we're willing to pursue any of these practices with some sincerity and some continuity, some regularity, then there will be results. There have to be results. Following the Eightfold Path actually only leads in one direction. So wherever we are, and I don't think I'm looking presently at anyone who is about to enter a monastery, I mean, from what I can tell. So that's just fine. But there you are. There you are in your apartments, in your houses, and that. And for whatever reason, here you are on a Friday night when you could be doing other things, enjoying the company of friends or going out to a movie. But here you are, interested in engaging in a bit of meditation and listening to some reflections on Dhamma. So it shows commitment. It shows that interest. It shows that there are conditions in your life that have led you to this place. And that is worthy of respect. It's worthy of acknowledgement. It's worthy of even celebrating, reminding yourself that your being here is a kind of accomplishment, actually, in human life. Given all the things that a human being could be doing right now in this world of ours, in Ottawa or wherever you are, Redwood Valley, you're doing this. Your interests, your intuitions have led you to this. And some of you, I think, have been on many retreats over the years, and you are very diligent. Hopefully everybody here with some kind of daily practice. Some of you probably a few hours per day even, which is very, very notable. Some people struggle with regularity, and it's always worth encouraging others, but certainly ourselves to be regular, because this is a training of the mind. And it's very hard to train the mind, just as it's very hard to train a child to play the piano if you can't get that child onto the stool to practice scales and learn about keys and so forth. Similarly, the mind is not going to take meditation seriously until it becomes a kind of habitual. It becomes normal, natural for regular practice during the day. So if you struggle with that sense of regularity, I would highly encourage it. I would highly encourage you to begin again to give yourself a bit of a push in that direction. It doesn't have to be an hour a day or 2 or 3 hours a day. If it's 20 minutes a day, that's good. But whatever it is, when it's regular, that sets a kind of pattern. And the mind is a kind of device for pattern recognition. It acknowledges that, and it feels normal. It feels normal, just as it feels normal to eat breakfast at whenever you eat it, 5:30, 7, 9. Whenever you eat breakfast, it's a normal thing. Well, meditation can acquire that same kind of regularity and naturalness.